This is, I think in the review I said it's 45 years since your debut album, and now you've got the follow-up.
Correct. We've done other things together in the meantime, and the 92, 93, whatever it was, compilation, we all worked together, and we're together at my place and Wayne's place, and quite frankly, we grew up together and are pretty close to brothers, virtually. Wayne was an only child, I'm an only child, and we just hit it off. And we all worked with each other over the years on other projects. Doug had a studio. He called Wayne in many times to do arranging on projects that I had going on. So we stayed in touch and great friends. I guess unlike many bands that have all kinds of problems, so we really feel very happy about that, and we always wanted to get back together. We wanted Wayne in on it, obviously.
Of course.
He did help us get some of the work and material back together.
For the new disc?
No. On some of the older material that was around and tapes that he had, and brought all kinds of things together for some of the older material, things that we didn't as a band even remember or knew existed anymore. And there turned out to be a lot of it. And it really inspired us. And part of the idea of the new disc really came about in two ways. One was I had the delusion, I suppose, of having written a script about the band. Everybody thinks they're worth a movie, and very few are. Well, we circulated the script around a little bit, and the unanimous thought about it was that it's quite interesting, it could work, but it needed a punchline. It needed something more contemporary, more today, because that was a while ago. And so...
I disagree, but who would say that?
Most of the people who are actually producers and screenwriters.
Because the Monkees is so hot, continues to be hot.
They probably weren't quite as hot 6, 7, 8 years ago when we started thinking and doing this. It has all come back much more right now. There's no doubt about that. So it's even a riper situation right now. And we started with that, and that kind of got us going on the new music because we wanted to bring the older back through exposing something new again. Plus, we really felt through the record companies that we had at the time, which we had large record companies overseas and all, EMI and Polygram, but in this country it was Jubilee, and they weren't big, they weren't really promoting very much. Whatever happened with us happened on its own, and they were really, in spite of us, they had many artists, but they weren't getting many hits, and they were going downhill, so they didn't spend a lot of money on us at the time. And we felt that we kind of got left short of what we were capable of doing.
Now, Phil Ramone worked on the record, right?
Phil Ramone, no, we recorded with him at the very beginning of our career.
Before Jubilee.
Before Jubilee.
With the D-Men.
Well, I thought he was at Jubilee, okay.
No, with the D-Men. And in fact, we were one of the first really rock and roll kind of things that he had recorded. He recorded Girl from Ipanema, and then later on he went to...
Streisand.
Yeah.
He was one of those untouchable guys. I think he's on my Facebook now. I just said happy birthday to him the other day. It's pretty funny that these people that were untouchable are now on your Facebook.
That's right.
It's just too weird.
You can talk to people now. And there was a time there where you couldn't even speak with anyone. You couldn't get in the door,
Right.
It was
Anthony DeCurtis from Rolling Stone, he has a new book out. So I just Facebooked him because he's on my Facebook.
There you go.
And he's on the phone with us,
You
talking
say
to us.
hello and you talk. Yeah.
It's
like the world should be, actually.
Right.
I think it's a whole... That has changed everything, too, because you can connect. I mean, Shel Talmy, who worked on the new record with us, who, you know, only did the Kinks and got the Who going, and on and on and on. I mean, I just can't even name everybody that he's had hit records with. The guy's got so many gold records on his wall.
Well, how did the Fifth Estate hook up with Shel Talmy, who is another legendary 60s producer?
He thought, first of all, he had heard that we were working on a new record. And he had a website up.
Yep.
And I continued that by sending him a note, said we have something. We sent him just a short little snippet of what we had done. And he wrote back instantly and said, look, I know you guys, I know you've recorded with orchestras, you do my kind of music.
Yeah.
He said, I always loved the harpsichord, I always loved things that you did. You took some rock and roll beyond where a lot of bands actually took it.
Yep.
And so we got together and talked about it, and the whole thing shaped up. We had about half the music together, and we saw where we were going then, direction-wise. And he pretty much agreed that the direction we had an idea to do was about good for the time, you know. It didn't appeal totally to the audience that our older music appealed to, but it had a double-edged sword. You could also appeal to a bit of a younger crowd with it as well, and we wanted to do that.
Yeah.
We didn't want to just become any kind of there's a word for it, the old-timer circuit that's out there.
A nostalgia or something,
circuit.
or an antique.
We
or
wanted
whatever,
to do something that was relevant in a contemporary form. And so we put that together. It was exactly the kind of music that he understood and knew precisely what we were doing. And he put a finish on it that, you know, we're tremendously happy with. And I'll tell you, most musicians find that a hard thing to end up with a product that they're truly happy with, you know?
Capturing the sound
The
that's in
sound
your
of the
head
band,
and the
it's
feel.
pretty much where we
Capturing.
left off.
Yeah.
But, you know, we've all had musical experience since then, everything from a million club dates, literally, with Rick the guitarist, to Broadway with Bob Klein, you know?
That's a pretty rich story. Now, there's 14 songs on Time Tunnel, which is the title of the Fifth Estate's new album.
Right.
And all of them are written by the quartet of the group,
Yes.
the four members now. How would you go about writing songs, writing material for your new album?
This was interesting, because unlike the old days where I have a picture of at Wayne Wadham's home, the whole downstairs of the house was dedicated to our band. And we were there, we slept on the floors. This was virtually a 24-hour-a-day thing for years. Unlike like that right now. But again, just like we mentioned with Joe here, the internet made it possible.
Yep.
Ricky, for instance, would have a bit of an idea of a melody. He'd send it to me. I'd go, hey, here's an idea for some words. This is how the tune Time Tunnel came about. I said, you know, this is a little bit of a strange thing that we were there then and not a whole lot in between, and now here they are again. I mean, what does this all mean? Is this totally insane? Is it, you know? So we put it in a little bit of a, something that people could at least envision or I hesitate to call it a concept because it doesn't go that far, but it's a little bit like that. And so I would email words back, but the great thing was that all the guys got to get an email of the words and would add and subtract, and we all edited, and then we'd shoot that back, and Rick and Doug were together more than the rest of us. Only when we got tunes to a point where they were really finished did we get together and play them. And then we not only had to play them, but we had to re-gel as a band.
Yeah.
And because, you know, we had 4 different influences. You know, I had gone off into more of a jazz direction. Doug had gone off into more of a dance or funk direction.
That's Doug Ferrara,
Doug
the
Ferrara, the bass player.
bass guitarist,
Yeah.
original bass guitarist from the D-Men and
Absolutely.
into the Fifth Estate.
Yep, all of us are original. Bob was my replacement in '69 when I left.
And Bob is a multi-talented, multi-instrumentalist.
All from Stamford, Connecticut.
You were all from the same town.
Same town.
So you all grew up in Stamford.
Not that many blocks from one another. Yeah. In a kind of I didn't want to call it trashy part of town because it wasn't, but it was a factory part of town. Wayne's father ran the gas station up at the corner, and we had the Paradise Bar and Grill right next door, and a factory here, and factories in the back, and so we grew up in that neighborhood all together, and we couldn't really. I'm at the Cape. Bob spends a lot of time. He does voiceovers in Hollywood. He's actually been in movies and so on and so forth. Rick basically had a band until about 6 or 7 years ago. All his life he ran a band. He didn't really want to get back into big time recording and so on, but he just gigged in a band called Nightline.
And that's Rick Engler,
Rick
who's
Engler,
your lead
the
guitarist
original-
and the vocalist.
Yes.
That's,
Yes.
yeah.
Bill Shute, who lives not too far from where we were before in Danbury. It's just one town from where we were originally, who still gigs and teaches and just makes a living off his guitar, has all his life. Did rehearse with us some, but once he started seeing the kind of effort it was going to take to put a legitimate album together, he said, I can't do that. He said, I'm making a living, I have to do that. But quite probably, we talked to him a little bit, he would be playing with us when we gig out. We need the extra guy. And so it really was the internet that made all this possible. We weren't living in the same towns. Doug's in Wallingford. Ricky works with an electronic company now in Wallingford, but lives in Brookfield. And Bob still lives in Stamford, but also has a place in Hollywood. And I'm at the Cape. So we only get together when we have everything pretty well set over the internet. And you know, it's very easy to just email a slice of a tune back and forth to one another and talk about it, make comments, and say, okay, we're going in this direction. We all know how to play kind of well enough so that isn't too much of a factor here. It's more really knowing what we're going to play and the tune, and then getting together and getting the feel of it. And we did all that one year, and we thought we had some recordings that were going to be final recordings here. But then Shell got into the picture, and those turned out to be demos.
Same, different songs or the same
song?
Same songs, but you
He
reworked.
picked a few more, and he wanted one or two others to add and fill out the spectrum of what he thought we could do with this kind of thing. So he had a little input, and then when we started doing them, he had some input as to arrangement, but not too much. Most of that was actually when we finished the Fifth Estate, believe it or not. Not that it ever finished, but when we really weren't gigging all the time anymore, the first thing Rick did was he went to the Berklee School of Music, our guitarist. And that was before Wayne was a professor there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he might have had Wayne as his professor,
That's
which
right.
would have been very strange. But in any event, he went to the Berklee School of Music, and so he's a little bit educated in that sense, as far as arranging and this and that. So we were quite capable of putting a decent album together, and we did. But once we had a guy who had a million hits along working with us, it stepped it up a few notches. It really did, and our aim became a bit higher, and so we went for it, and like I was telling you a little bit before we started here, we're somewhat happy and enthusiastic with what we did, which hasn't always been the case in our career, We've, many times back in New York City, the first thing you get in the studio, you start looking at the clock because the money's burning,
Yeah.
And everything that we did had to be done quickly and right on top of the groove and everything, just so it would happen. And, here we had a little bit of time to think about things. We could rework something when we wanted to. And that makes a big difference. I think you get a better, more cohesive album out of it,
So your approach to recording today, by definition, is different than your approach was when you were 19, 20 years old and rushing in. And
we had complete time pressure then.
Yeah.
And being that we weren't big names yet,
Yeah.
although around New York we were very, very well known, but being well known and drawing and filling a club is a lot different than being well known nationally and filling theaters and whatnot. I mean, early on, that's where we were at when we were doing this recording. And so economically, you had to be able to be intensely efficient in the studio.
Yeah.
And we're probably more efficient now than we were then, but still we had time now. And it's part of the new way of doing things and technology and the way the world is. This stuff is all much more available. I mean, everyone can do it, and I guess almost everyone is, so why shouldn't we? And basically, that wasn't so earlier on. You had to be lucky and have someone think you were kind of okay and willing to spend some money. We didn't have money ourselves. We were kids, in middle of high school when we started, and
Just to refresh our viewers out there, we're with Ken Evans, drummer from the group The Fifth Estate, and maybe if the people who do remember The Fifth Estate would remember a big hit, which was a big hit in the Boston area, or if you're listening to the radio back in 1967 on the old WMEX or WBZ, which were the top 40 stations at the time.
we did a lot of shows here for BZ.
There you go. So we talk about a couple of those too. But the big hit that was on the radio in I guess it would be the spring summer of 1967 was "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead," which is, of course, people know is from The Wizard of Oz. But then the group The Fifth Estate had conceptualized it in a modern vein for that exciting 1967 year, which was also the year of Sgt. Pepper. And
this was just a month or so before Sgt. Pepper.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we had heard some stories about, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead made it to number 11 nationally. It was number 1 in a lot of the big cities that we went around to, from Oklahoma, I think Boston. I think got up to 4 or 5 in New York or something like that. But we had heard that it would have done better, but the Beatles dropped right at that time Sgt. Pepper, and there was a tune or two on there that went screaming right to the top and occupied half the chart up there and pushed everything back down. So we'd like to thank them for that. But we'd like to thank them for a lot of things. They really made the scene happen.
Inspired.
They were the energy and the inspiration for a whole new wave of music right at that point.
But there was a certain connection in that what the Beatles were doing was bringing classical music into pop and rock and roll music, and that's in a sense what the Fifth Estate did with Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead.
It is, in a way, although we didn't realize that so much from the Beatles' perspective. Although as we got older, and everybody analyzes these things more, but right at the time, we just knew it was good.
Yep.
And we didn't really know where it was coming from so much. And this wasn't like a pre-planned or premeditated thing with Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. This came from where almost all our stuff came from, a wild party in New York City. And it was a bet that somebody said he couldn't make a hit out of it. And one of the guys there said, "Oh, yeah?" And it happened to be our keyboardist, Wayne, who liked the harpsichord sound. It just happened to be a suitable thing to show off some of his talent, which we were somewhat having trouble showing off in the standard rock and roll sense.
Yeah.
To take this into a field where all of a sudden you could play the kind of music that he was capable of playing and had played in theaters himself when he was younger.
As an organist.
As an organist,
Yeah.
generally, yeah. Really made a difference to us. And then it really, it just caught on. We didn't know what a hit was like. We'd put out quite a number of tunes, and some of them did okay, regionally, Boston, New York, the East, but they weren't major national hits. And this, I can remember us all sitting in a restaurant in our hometown, Stamford, one night with Billboard magazines all over the place going, "Look it, with a bullet, there we are," you know? And it just went right up. It was just one of those things. It wasn't promoted into anything. It wasn't hyped into anything. And the other really interesting thing about it is, although in the early mid-'70s when rock got harder and heavier,
Yeah.
its influence tapered off a bit, but then without any help from us or anyone else, it's been coming back ever since. It's stronger and stronger. It gets played all the time.
I think it's also one of those songs that gets a lot of play on oldie stations around, the Halloween holiday every year. I think it gets some extra spins, at least in Boston, I've heard it.
It definitely gets extra spins around the Halloween holidays, but I have a friend at the Cape, I don't know what station they actually listen to. I think they were saying it was Sirius XM.
Oh, yep.
They said in the last few months they heard it no less than 6 times.
Very good.
Serious.
Hey, guys, I'm putting images up, so if you want to give me images and talk about them, you can see them on the monitor.
Well, that's marvelous.
And,
And Ken brought some images with him, so.
I did.
Why not,
I don't know.
Joe
I don't
can
want to make
put
a
few of
history
those, but-
lesson out of this too
Well,
much. This is
I think-
music and contemporary stuff, but
There you go. Well, it's,
Just give me the images,
this is the only picture I know of. Oh, okay.
and when you see them on the monitor,
you can
Okay.
comment on them as we're talking about the Fifth Estate. Might as well
Sure.
see some pictures of of what you're talking about, because you were
Okay.
part of it, Ken.
Well,
Sure.
I can't deny that.
And,
So that particular song,
is what you're,
it's
is what the group,
from one of the more popular movies of all time.
so it's a perennial.
And it just keeps going. Plus, it's the highest charted tune that's ever been recorded from that movie.
Oh, that's a nice song to have.
And everybody who was anybody back 20, 30 years in that time frame before us, Glenn Miller, I think, did something from it. Let's see, Bette Midler did something from it. Michael Jackson did a tune from The Wizard
Oh, the
of Oz.
Wiz, yeah, when he did the movie there.
They're almost any big name you mention has done a tune from this, and ours charted higher than any of them, so I like that. I mean, it just feels good,
Yep,
you know?
Yep. But, now
Yes,
what-
I do see a picture up. that's the only picture we have of the Wadhams residence and the band Palace in Stamford, Connecticut. It was up in a, I think we already mentioned a little bit, and right across the street was a factory and the Paradise Bar and Grill,
Yep.
which really ended up being the first place we played out at a few times.
Wow.
Very underage,
But,
and but they let us in because they knew all the parents and the family, and it was a real neighborhood thing.
so it was-
And actually, the way the band started out, I joke about this party thing, but Wayne's house was an open house all the time. The parents were sensational.
they were pretty cool for that era then, huh?
They were so cool, you couldn't imagine.
No, that's remarkable for that, the mid-'60s, early mid-'60s.
Oh, yeah. And what would happen is, in a lot of bands, this is like a typical garage band story. This is,
Yep.
except we weren't in the garage, we were kind of in the basement, except the basement in this house was the first floor. And our rehearsals would often be parties. All the kids from the neighborhood would be there, they'd be dancing, and after we did a rehearsal and you see some of the people, especially in the summertime, head out, or maybe it was wintertime, I don't know. But the heat and the perspiration and the activity, they'd head outside and you could see steam coming off the bodies. You
Oh,
know?
my,
It was-
yeah.
It was just a time. I'm sure any band person has stories like this. These are fairly typical. But they're really what makes it worthwhile and makes you live with this kind of thing. Because as you get out there into the world, it's just like life itself. Some of those stories keep you going and give you, fertile areas that that propel you along. Because as you get out there and you deal with other business people and whatnot, it isn't always as pretty a picture anymore. For us,
No,
it
this is a
wasn't.
pretty picture right there.
Now, there's a pretty picture.
Now, you've been propelled along, and that is the
This
fifth
is,
estate of
this
today, is that
us
correct?
Today, virtually.
So that's the-
Bill on the left is a guitarist who he rehearsed with us, but once he started seeing the time commitment it was going to take to do this new album, he said, I really can't put that in. He makes and has all his life is living with his guitar and some teaching now also.
But he is a Fifth Estate original, so he
He's a-
belongs.
Yes.
So he belongs.
He does,
Yeah.
and when we gig, he'll be in with us. I'm fairly certain, and it's just nice to be able to have guys who really. I don't have a brother or sister. These guys are my brothers, really.
And that's the group that did record the new disc, the Time Tunnel.
That's
the
correct.
Time Tunnel group right there. And now the Time Tunnel, of course, some of us remember it, who are old enough, remember there's a mid-'60s sci-fi, really
It
nice
was a
television.
really pretty cool
good television
sci-fi TV show
Yeah.
about people going back in time and whether they're
couple
going
of
to
guys.
affect history or
Yeah.
could they do anything to improve anything or
to change.
There was a lot of thought going on
was-
there,
there was-
as opposed to Captain Video is dodging asteroids all the time in 10 years earlier,
So I really like that title because it hit with me because I can still remember looking forward to that show every week.
Well, things that hit with people and stick in their minds is a good thing to have, because quite frankly, like I said before, in this digital age, most people can record. It's not that difficult. It isn't, and, okay, so we just went from the present.
This is the Time Tunnel. We're going
This
back.
is the time tunnel right here. I mean, we're back, 40 years?
Back in 1964.
I think we look better now. We look kind
there
of
you go.
skinny and sick and anemic over here. I mean,
Oh, well, there you
except,
go.
when you throw a red light on us, okay, we looked alive, but otherwise, I mean, I can tell you we were skinny and sick and anemic because all we did, we'd go years and we wouldn't see the sun.
Well, no, on
We were
that
just
drum
playing at
kit,
night.
on that drum kit, it said the D-Men, because the D-Men was the group that started before, was the name for the same group before it became the Fifth Estate?
It's the same band.
Yeah.
We just changed our name
Changed
when we
it,
had a
but-
horrendous time with Murray the K, which some of us might remember.
But as the D-Men.
As
You
the
knew-
D-Men.
Because you
Yeah.
had a song that was on Murray the K's show in New York and was picked out as like the Pick to Click over.
It was the Pick to
big-
Click.
Big groups,
right.
British bands of that time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it beat out the Dave Clark 5 tune, I don't remember which one, and an Animals tune. I think it was We Gotta Get Out of This Place, but
It would have been in that period. Was that
Yeah.
Don't You Know the song, or was that, do you remember which song it was of the
that
D-Men?
was Don't You Know.
Don't You Know, yeah.
Yes.
Nice Brit sounding, Anglo pop, I think I would
Yeah.
call that. Nice.
Yeah.
It's outdoing the British at their own game.
It was, and it did there, legitimately. The problem we had with Murray is that he was very hooked into the Brit sound and actually promoting that on his show. And we weren't. We were local. So we cannot figure out exactly what went on there, and that's a whole other story. But he actually pulled that tune off, saying that, oh, we had all our friends call in, and that's why we won, and a big to-do about that. And he's so big in New York that hurt us substantially. Okay, I think there was just an image up that was another image of the Fifth Estate, actually really playing in a Coliseum date. Me up on a big riser, all the amps down in front. And these were in days where you really had to have it together because there were no special little microphones or monitors. There were a couple of voice speakers way out there and guitar amps down here, and many nights I'd hear only drums the entire performance, you know.
So you had to have the song in your head.
You had to know it.
Yeah.
So I think there was also the image right after that just right there.
Okay, let's talk about that.
That's Fairmont Hall. This is one of the most intensely exhilarating rock and roll shows I've either ever attended or had the honor of playing in. It was in late 65, early 66, and it was put on by it was a Beaux-Arts ball, actually. And it was put on by the Arts and Architects people of Philadelphia. That was the art palace for the centennial celebration. No, we're not old enough to have been there at the centennial. That's not what I'm saying. But these buildings were still there. Mm-hmm. And for all of us who've seen Rocky waving his hands in the air and running up and down steps of building in Philadelphia, that was one of the buildings right there that he was shot on. And we played the show. And there was a rather sedate orchestra that alternated sets with us at first, but then after a while, and I feel bad for the other musicians. I've been on the other side of this, but the crowd didn't want to hear them anymore. They wanted the new thing that was going on, and this was a fairly Baroque hall, and it could have thousands of people in there. It wasn't seated, but it had food, and it had food concessions, and it was a dance. We were basically a rock and roll dance band. This was really before the time of seated concerts so much,
Yep.
you know. People would come out and want to dance. And so they danced, and they danced, and they danced. And we went on, and we tried to do an encore and stop and end it, and they kept us going. And finally, people started breaking into the drinks and the potato chips and the concessions. It was getting wilder and wilder, and the police came in and put an end to the whole thing. And we read about it in the newspapers the next day when we went home. But no one was hurt. Everybody had a great time. It was really, maybe at the end, a little more intense than you would typically want today. I mean, we've all grown a little bit, But I'm telling you, some of that energy and that excitement wouldn't hurt some of today's world, and we have some of it on our new record here.
On the
We
time.
tried to pick up where we left off there, and there it is. One of the interesting things about that image is that we had to license the actual TV series image from 20th Century Fox and from the Irwin Allen, who was the producer of that show, family. And that took us a while just to do that alone.
That's amazing when you think of it, that you know, that to use an image like that from a show that basically I think was 1 or 2 seasons at the most.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but, you know, to repeat that, in this point in time, everyone's so careful about their own intellectual property
Yeah.
that you even have to license.
They were a little
something like
iffy
that.
about it, but once they heard who we were and who was working with us production-wise.
You guys are in it.
Yeah,
There you
we
go.
are
That's
in
the
it.
real time
Hey,
tunnel,
there's
yeah.
a time tunnel and a half right there. At least you're the half. I'm the,
Let's see if we can go back to 66. But yeah, it just goes to show the way.
But they worked with us.
And they did it, and they agreed
Yeah.
to it ultimately.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. That works great, and I think it will connect with people around the country and around the globe, even because this show occasionally does get on some of those old, you know, shows that
And
networks that play the old shows on
Their
cable.
DVDs
It's
are
still-
out there,
yep.
still selling, and
So-
I think they thought that we were legitimate enough, whatever that means. I don't even know if that's a good thing
It
in
was-
rock and roll.
It was worth. It was
Being illegitimate might be better these days, I don't know, but we've always tried to do everything legitimately, you know what I mean?
Well, on Time Tunnel, I noticed that the song you at least are calling your single is "It's Not Right."
Right.
One that it's got a very sort of I think I call it sort of a contemporary garage rock or punk
Yes.
rock sound to it.
Cool, it's exactly where we'd hoped it would be. We've had many, well, let me not say many yet, several very good reviews. But we had one that was just sort of mediocre, and they said, it's a jangly garage band singing about boys and girls. Well, there isn't one tune on here that's just that. And maybe they needed to listen to it more than once to
Give
get
it-
it. You certainly could get that this guitarist here was trying to steal his best friend's girlfriend, which isn't the coolest thing in the world to do. But it's basically a tongue-in-cheek thing about kind of knowing what's right and what's wrong, and what is right and what's wrong, and all of that. And that's a little deeper than, let me put it this way, we wouldn't have done some of this back in the 60s. We were teenagers,
Yeah.
and it was the straight-ahead stuff, you know?
It was "Hey Baby."
Well, it was "Hey Baby." And today, from where we are, we have a little more life experience, some of it good, some of it bad, but you learn from all of it. And it had to work its way in here, I think. So it was a very novel experience for us, not trying to write, because it came very easily, music like we did before, but the lyrics were a whole new can of worms.
To really work on it.
To
Well,
re-
now,
yeah.
let's talk a little bit about that, because you are a unique band, and you may, as far as I know, be the first rock band who ever had a lyricist who was sort of the sixth member of the group, who wasn't actually, you know, either the vocalist might be the lyricist in other bands, or just the guitar player might write the song and the lyric.
Right.
But the Fifth Estate actually had a guy, Don Askew,
Don,
who
yes.
was part of the band but wasn't actually in the 5 members. He was a 6th member who wrote your lyrics.
He
for it. Is
wasn't
that
a
correct?
playing member on stage.
Or
Correct.
contributed to help you with the lyrics or something.
He was an idea man.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at ourselves as musicians.
Yeah.
Don looked at himself as a reader. I don't want to say intellectual, he wouldn't agree with that, but he knew stuff that we didn't know.
Yeah.
And
That's interesting.
And he also lived in New York and got us into the Village, and kind of got us plugged in. We were looked at as a bunch of really young guys in a band in the Village. Almost all the other bands that were down there at the time were older than we were.
Oh.
And so we were kind of looked at as like the kids from the suburbs. But Don plugged us in enough so that we weren't the totally simplistic, ignorant kids from the suburbs, although we really were, you know.
Now, was he older than you guys, or was he
No.
just a little more hip or something? at the
He
time?
was just a reader of, we all
He was
read.
almost
I
like,
mean,
like part of the, what you might call a beat type guy.
He was
you know,
definitely that.
Yeah.
Definitely that. I mean, you know, all of that, all of the poetry, the Naked Lunch, the whole thing, you know.
So, but you know, later on, different rock groups did that. Keith Reed famously did it with Procol Harum. White as Shade of Pale was the pure lyricist, and then you know, the Beach Boys, of course, tried it with various people, with Brian Wilson worked. But I just thought it was very interesting.
Let me just say that this wasn't a premeditated or planned thing.
Yeah.
It just happened
It
that
was
way.
natural, huh?
And probably because the rest of us, not that we couldn't write lyrics,
Yeah.
we were just too busy having fun and doing other stuff. We were musicians, mainly.
You were playing.
We were players and
Yeah.
singers. And so we started realizing that Ricky and I wrote some things together.
Yep.
And
Back in
Yeah.
the
yeah, right,
D-Man,
right then
Fifth
at the
Estate era.
D-Man, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And we were more than capable of doing that, but Don kind of came up with things that were kind of cool. Plus, he had more time to spend, kind of like we do over the internet now, with all the messages back and forth. He had more time to spend with Wayne on that to coordinate those things.
Yep.
So that was a function that really let us maybe rehearse more, and not have to worry about sitting there writing a piece. It was already written. This is it, you know?
And you guys could play.
Yeah.
Now, what was it, you mentioned like playing in Greenwich Village. Now, what were some of the type of places you might have played back in the
We
mid-'60s?
played all the clubs down there. I mean,
For those of us from Boston who maybe, Trudy Hellers was one name. is
well,
one-
Trudy Hellers was a kind of Midtown, I think. It
Yeah,
wasn't really
that wasn't the
uptown.
grill. Okay,
Ondine's
I'm-
was uptown, and we were at all these. We played at Trudy Hellers a lot. I'll get back to Greenwich Village in a second, because there's a whole different scene.
Oh, okay, this would be interesting, yeah.
Yeah, a whole different scene. Trude Hellers really was a dinner club that actors and actresses had come into from the theater district at some point. It was run by Trudy, who was gay, and it was quite a show in there with Roger, the 7-foot-tall black transvestite who was one of the go-go girls, and you know, this was when things were starting to be realized, and coming, you know, coming to fruition here, and it was a place that was interesting. It was a place you went into, you could hear music, you could hear soul music. We alternated with a soul band every other set. And basically, it's where people came to see people if they thought they would want them on a New York TV show. It's where they came to see us before we got on Hullabaloo, which was pretty cool. And they saw us play, and they said, that works, and we did it.
So it was almost a place to audition for even more than that.
Even more than
Yeah,
that,
so it
right.
was important
So
stuff.
that was Trude Hellers. And then back down in the Village, that was a whole other thing now, because, again, we didn't premeditate any of this. We kind of were what we were. But when we got down into the Village, we were like bracketed by two types of bands. There was, let me put it this way, there was probably on one side, there were lots of bands, but I would say, just trying to think who'd be a good example.
I'm stuck in the time tunnel as you're thinking about that. You have 4.5 minutes, and then I'm going to come on, and we're all going to wrap up with
Okay.
a 5-minute telephone conversation with Frank Delastrito,
Okay,
who ends our show every week.
very good.
We've got 4 minutes.
Okay. Probably on one side of us would have been the Village Fugs. I don't know if you remember who they are.
They were
But-
beat
Very beat.
Weird.
poet, weird,
Strange, yeah.
strange,
Acoustic,
totally
yeah.
uncommercial, and they
Yeah.
could care
And they
less.
didn't wanna be
And they didn't want to be commercial. On the other side was, God, I should remember the name of this band, the Byrds.
Well, yeah,
Okay.
there you go, that's pretty
And
big.
we played shows with the Byrds at Village Gate. We opened for them, and they were fairly well-known already at that point.
mhm.
Yeah. And they were, to us, although they came out of the folk end of things, they were to us looked at as a commercial band. We didn't want to be that commercial, or we kind of maybe would have liked to at times, but it wasn't really where we were at.
Wasn't
you know?
your goal
It
necessarily.
wasn't our goal necessarily. We kind of wanted to do things that we thought were more different, more interesting. We didn't want to be the Fugs, and we didn't want to be the Byrds. So we ended up right in the middle. Kind of close to being commercial, but not as commercial as every tune you put out screams to the top of the charts. You know what I mean?
Yep.
We did rely a lot on our rock and roll dance side and got people on the floor a lot. So we were a dance band as opposed to just cranking out top 40 hits. And that was what we did in the Village. We went around, we played at the Downtown, which was a huge club down there. In fact, it's probably the largest club at that time in the city.
Oh,
It had been an old speakeasy with banked seating, dance floor, stage, and a huge bar all around the back. And it was actually an early club down there called, the name of it was the Society Downtown, and was an early jazz place where everybody played from, let's see, Satchmo and the whole group, you know. And that hadn't been a thing that had happened much in the Village. That was strictly an uptown thing.
the jazz scene.
The jazz scene like that. So it kind of went that way. We played there. We played, I think, I forget the name of a lot of these clubs now. The Open was not the Open Door, but I think it might have been the Open Door. Long gone.
We've got 1 minute left, but I want you guys to stay as we review The General, the Buster Keaton film. And I'd like to invite you back to Visual Radio, because I think that we haven't even scratched the surface.
It's hard to do 50 years in 50 minutes.
It is, isn't it?
It works out to be, what, about 5 minutes a decade, I think.
Hey, they used to do it in the time tunnel, we go through hundreds
Well,
of years, so
5
there you
minutes
go.
in a decade.
Time tunnel would do.
There you go.
We're here with Ken Evans, drummer from the Fifth Estate, who's just released a brand new CD called Time Tunnel, 14 original songs by the members of the Fourth Estate, the Fourth Estate, four members of the Fifth Estate.
Our aim is to keep the Fourth Estate on their toes.
There you go. But it's a 14-track CD in the Fifth Estate. These are all members of the group from the 1960s, the original group from the 1960s. So it's quite a thing, Ken, and we're happy to have the Fifth Estate back.
We appreciate it so much. We really do.